So now let's move on to the higher order thinking skills, which is creating, evaluating, analyzing, applying, understanding, and remembering, to lower order thinking skills. And the HATS, or the higher order thinking skills, are doing, and the active receiving and participating, like visual receiving, and the passive verbal receiving. Levels of knowledge. First is the factual knowledge. This is knowledge about basic foods and informations, examples, dates, names, definitions, or formulas. Next is the conceptual knowledge. So this is understanding how ideas and facts are connected and how they work together. For example, understanding from multiplication relates to repeated addition. Third one is the procedural knowledge. Procedural knowledge is learning the steps of how to do something or follow a process. For example, solving math problem using steps and follow instruction in a science. The last one is the metacognition knowledge. This is being aware of your own thinking and learning strategies. For example, knowing which study method work best for you and thinking about how you learn. So now let's move on to the ILO, or the intended learning outcomes. This should be written in a SMART, or a very specific, measurable, attainable, result-oriented outcomes and time-bound. So in this scenario, teachers can check if the students truly achieve their goal. The second one is the procedure, methods, and strategies. So this is how the teacher will teach the lesson, and it includes activities, teaching approaches, and techniques that help students understand the lessons and how to achieve the intended learning outcomes. And it also brings the lesson to life through meaningful learning experiences. So next is the approaches and the methods uses for teaching different kinds of learning, showing how something is done and then guiding students to do it. So first, guide. The teacher gives step-by-step instructed while students follow along. So exploring discovery approach. So this approach, students learn by exploring, observing, and discovering ideas on their own with minimal guidance. So next is the problem solving. So in this scenario, students solve into real life problems to learn concepts and skills. So next is project method. So in this method, students work on long-term tasks or projects to apply what they learned. So next is the cooperative learning approaches. So this approach, students learn together in groups, helping each other understand lessons. So per teaching, students teach or assist classmates who need help. So learning action cells. Small groups discuss challenges and share strategies for learning. The next is think, pair, and share. So students first think individually, pair up to discuss, and then share ideas with the class. The next approach is the deductive or inductive approaches. So the teacher gives a rule, concept first, then the students apply it through activities. So first is the inductive approach. Students observe examples first and then discover the rule of their own. So next is project method. So in this method, learning happens through hands-on projects to apply knowledge. Then inquiry-based learning. Students ask questions and investigate answers through research and experiments. So the last approach is the approach, or the blended learning. So mix of face-to-face learning and online learning. So the first definition is the reflective teaching. Students and the teachers think about what they learned and how they can improve. So next is the integrated learning. Students are connected to each other instead of being thoughts separately. And then the outcome-based approach. This approach learning is focused on what student must be able to do after the. So next is the 3 learning different style of the students. So there are 3 different style of students, which is the visual learners, auditory learners, and the kinesthetic learners. So the first style is the visual learners. They learn best using pictures, charts, graphs, and diagrams because they remember information better than they see it written or presented visually. So the second one is the auditory learners. So understand better by listening and speaking. They prefer explanation given verbally and learn best through discussions, storytelling, or listening to instructions. They often remember information by saying it or hearing it repeated. So next is the kinesthetic learners. So they learn through hands-on activities and movement. They prefer to do it, demonstrate rather than just listen or read. They enjoy activities like experiments, role-playing, and group tests or group projects. They can move and actively participate doing these activities, doing hands-on activities. So now, let's move on to the teaching and learning must be supported by instructional materials or IMS of cone learning. So, the first, as you can see, the 90%, the definition of that is what we both see, say, and do. So, the 70% of what we say. The 50% is of what we hear and see. The 30% is the what we see, and the 20% of that is what we hear, and the 10% of that is what we read. So which is the 90% is the doing, and then the receiving, participating, visual, and the verbal. So now let's move on to the instructional support materials should match learning styles and desired outcomes, progressing from concrete to abstract experiences to maximize retention. So first is the direct purposeful experience, the 90% retention. So learning by doing. Students learn best when they do activity themselves. For example, like field trips, hands-on practices, community work, and experiments. So next is the active participation, the 70% retention. So students learn actively engaging in discussions and activities with others. So for example, reporting, role-playing, debates, and panel discussions. Number 3, passive participation, the 60% retention. Students learn by watching others do activity instead of doing it themselves. So for example, movies, demonstration, exhibits, and performance. Next is the passive participation, the 60% retention. So students learn watching others do activity instead of doing it themselves. So for example, movies, demonstration, exhibits, and performances. The next one is the visual observation. So the 30% retention. Students learn by viewing images and visual representations. So for example, pictures, drawing, and charts, diagrams. Number 5 is the auditory learning, the 20% retention. So students learn through hearing information, for example, like lectures, speeches, and audio recordings. So number 6 is the reading, the 10% retention. So students learn by reading printed materials, for example, like textbooks, books, handouts, and the articles.